Yes, here we go. It is me, Bruce Hope, and I'm back with another episode of the Format Podcast. So today I've got something that's a little different from what you've gotten used to if you've been here with me for a while. I'm taking it back a little bit, kind of for the first time in a long time. I'm doing it solo. That's right. No guests, just me hanging out with you guys and talking for a little bit about, some things that have been on my mind in the sports world. It won't be as long probably as the episodes where I have company, but it'll be cool to kind of just get back to how we used to do this. All right. So today I'm going to hit a couple of different subjects. So let's knock out that intro real quick, like we always do, and get right to it. All right. First off, thanks for checking in. If you're on YouTube, you know how this works. Click that subscribe button in the lower right corner of your screen. Click the bell to be notified when new content's available for you. And after the show, if you liked what you saw, go ahead, click that like button. I really appreciate it. All right. If you want to reach out directly, you can catch me on social media. You know where that is. It's at Bruce F.A. Hope. That's at Bruce F.A. Hope on Twitter, at The Format Podcast on Instagram, at The Format Podcast, and The Format Podcast at Outlook.com. The Format Podcast at Outlook.com if you want to email me. You can let me know if you like the show. If you think I'm an idiot, it doesn't matter. I love the interaction. I definitely do. And it lets me know that you're listening. You can also suggest topics that you want to hear me address that I might have missed, or, just let me know whether I'm right or wrong on some of the different things I talked about. All right. If you want the audio version of the podcast, we're wherever you get your podcast. That's right. Stitcher, Spotify, Podbean, Overcast, Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you get your audio podcast. And real quick, whatever platform you listen on, if you're able to, please go ahead and give us that 5-star review, especially on iTunes. Helps us move up in the rankings so we can continue to bring this show out for you, and makes it easier to find if people are looking for it. Real quick, whether you're looking for the podcast audio version, whether you're looking for the YouTube show, whatever it is you're looking for on whatever platform, just type in The Format Podcast. That's The Format Podcast. We should pop right up. All right. So, with all that said and done, you know what it is. Sit back, relax, and listen up to episode 103 of The Format. This off here with a topic I don't normally talk about very much on the pod, but I actually love as a sports fan, right? Boxing. I think maybe I've talked about this once or twice in the past, but I'm gonna go into it a little bit today. So, just kind of give you a little background. While I'm prepping for this topic, I'm sitting here and I'm watching Mickey Ward versus Arturo Gatti 1 on YouTube, and since the prep's finished, I've also watched 2, and I'm into the third fight. And honestly, if you call yourself a boxing fan and you haven't seen this, you're missing out. Watch it. I guarantee you won't be disappointed. You hear the expressions from the commentators, mainly guys like Jim Lampley, talking about walking through fire and, not just a test of the chin, but a test of the heart and all that good stuff that you don't see from some of the biggest fighters in today's era. You will not be disappointed. Watch this fight if that's what you like. If you want fan-friendly action fights, watch that. And there's some others I can mention, but definitely the Mickey Ward versus Arturo Gatti trilogy. All right, rest in peace, Arturo Gatti. Anyway, boxing isn't something I get to a lot because there's always a lot of time between big fights, and sometimes realistically, with the state of the boxing game the way it is now, you can go a year or two without the fight that you really want to see, right? But I wanted to touch on it today. So last weekend we had a fight between Jake Paul and former welterweight MMA champion who's now retired, Tyron Woodley. All right. Jake Paul won the fight, but that's not really where my mind is on that. Who won or who lost? It's like, okay, whatever. Um, I don't quite consider myself a boxing purist, right? But I think I'm closer to that. In what I respect and what I want to see in a fight and what I want to see in the sport of boxing itself. Okay. Um, why do I say that? I just mentioned stuff like walking through fire and testing the chin and testing the heart. So as much as I admire the sweet science, defensive skills, and all of that, I also understand that at the end of the day, a boxing match it's a gladiator sport. It is a test of wills, man versus man, mano y mano, as they say. No one in there to help you. It is you against your opponent, imposing your will and seeing, through throwing hands, who is the superior man on that night in that moment. And that's what I want to see. And so sometimes, while I admire the skill piece of it, I want to see, my carnal side wants to see the brawl. I want to see the back and forth. I want to see the action fights, right? Skill is cool, but I want to see a guy like a Sugar Ray Leonard, and we'll talk about him later, who has the elite skill set, the elite hand and foot speed, but also has what it takes to stand in there and again walk through the fire if need be, engage his opponent, and either come up short, which I don't knock someone for giving maximum effort, or get the win because they had more of what was needed to win that particular fight. So Jake Paul won the fight, but where does Jake Paul and his brother Logan Paul fit in to this whole thing, right? Honestly, I don't know because I'm kind of in the middle on it. And what do I mean by that? I want the best for boxing as a sport because honestly, I love it as a fan, and I would love to see boxing return to a bigger level of mainstream popularity. I just would. Um, so guys like Jake Paul and Logan Paul, they bring a lot of eyes to the sport because they have huge social media power, right? Let's be real here. They are tremendously viable in the social media aspect, which is why they are able to get these fights and make this money and charge pay-per-view because they're very popular as influencers, right? Okay. That brings in a lot of money. So where my issue kind of comes in on this is, why does it take more spectacle to bring boxing the attention that it deserves instead of just having elite fighters and elite fights? All right. What's the reason for all this? Or who's the reason for all this? Or is it both? Are too many of the biggest fights on pay per view? Maybe. And when boxing was at its peak, right? It's arguable that in terms of popularity, that was when it was on free TV. Now I get it. I get it. I want fighters to get paid, especially when they put their bodies through so much and risk their health the way they do. All right. It's not normal to have an occupation where getting hit in your head and body continuously over the course of years is how you earn your money, right? They do that. And it's only a small percentage of the population that's able to do that. And these guys, even if they're not elite boxers, as athletes, they're much higher level than most of us are. Okay, cool. So again, I want guys to get paid, but the fact that we have these, sometimes exorbitant pay-per-view prices, that prices a lot of viewers out of the opportunity to watch these fights, and that makes it less available to the average person to see, and as such, boxing suffers in terms of mainstream popularity, right? You could pick, a lot of the elite fighters, and these dudes walk down the street and a lot of people might not even know who they are, myself included, depending on who it is. Like I know who Bud Crawford or Errol Spence is. Obviously, we know the Manny Pacquiao's, the Floyd Mayweathers, the Deontay Wilders, because Deontay Wilder's like 6'7", Tyson Fury like 6'9". The heavyweights are like super heavyweights now, so I get that. But in general, the point is most of the elite fighters in the smaller weight classes probably mm, maybe super middleweight and down. You could probably walk past a lot of them on the street, and that's not how it used to be. But what's the other issue, right? What else could the problem be? Some of the bigger name fighters are and were making quote unquote business decisions. You know who I'm talking about. Thanks, Floyd. Um, Floyd Mayweather Jr., that is. i.e., making it popular to pick and choose who and when you fight and manipulate circumstances. I don't have a lot of respect for that. I talked a little while ago about how boxing is such a gladiator sport and it's the ultimate test of wills. And I get that you are, especially in the case of Floyd, you're doing what's best for you in terms of your health, in terms of your pocketbook, your bank account. And I get all that. But the way he kind of did things, and then also the way he fought in terms of his own personal style, let's be real here, it wasn't entertaining. He was not a crowd pleasing fighter, right? People didn't tune in to watch what people tuned in more likely because they wanted to see if Floyd could be beat or beaten up. Okay. Um, then what else is an issue? You have promoters who, instead of giving the fans the fight they want and the fights that are best for the sport, which coincidentally could make tons of money, they let personal issues, ego, and not having complete control over both sides keep all these major fights from happening. And to me, that's ridiculous. It's a bad look for the sport, and the sport is paying for it, right? You look at the 70s, 80s, 90s, even the mid 2000s, right? We almost always saw the best fighting the best. What happened to that? If you go back, it was rare that you had, elite fighters and you didn't see them fight each other, right? The great Muhammad Ali, again, rest in peace. He took them all on during his career, right? Even when the heavyweight division was at its zenith, and you had your Muhammad Ali and your Ken Norton and your Joe Frazier and your George Foreman and all these guys, they all fought each other. We were never left at that time period in the sport of boxing ever wondering, I wonder what would have happened if this guy fought that guy, or I wish I could have seen this guy fight that guy, because it was it was part of the mark of greatness that guys had to fight each other. You weren't seeing dudes ducking, or even though promoters were involved, you were seeing a lot less of, well, this guy can't fight that guy because promotional issues and this and that and the third. And, they're on different networks and all this nonsense. Like, the amount of money that's involved, especially today, make that work it out so that we can get the fights that we want to see. Better for the sports, better for the fighters, right? No more complaining who was the best in their era because they didn't necessarily fight anyone, or they waited and, let guys get old, or this, that, and the third. Like, all that nonsense needs to go away, right? I think that's part of the beauty of UFC. I'm not a big UFC guy, but because it's pretty much one governing body, the best fight the best, and there's no way around it, right? So, you know, that's where we are there. I'm thinking about it, right? There's no excuse on that front why a Bud Crawford and an Errol Spence Jr. haven't fought each other yet. There's no excuse. There's no reason why, even before he lost to Tyson Fury, when Fury wasn't even active as a fighter, Deontay Wilder, who was knocking everybody out and he was undefeated, and Anthony Joshua, who was also knocking everybody out and was undefeated, both world champions, hadn't fought each other. There's no excuse for that. There was no reason why we didn't get to see Gervonta Davis and Vasyl Lomachenko go at it. There's just not, well, the Gervonta Davis and Vasyl Lomachenko. I think that's because Gervonta Davis, he's under Floyd Mayweather's management and promotion, and so we know what that is. He's going to encourage him to, again, manipulate circumstances much the way he did during his career. And don't get me wrong, Floyd clearly made the most of his career 50-0. And sometimes I think that O meant too much, because with that O, he was unwilling to really and truly test himself. It seemed like every fight he took was very carefully calculated in terms of how much it would take from him and how easily he could win, whether or not that was the right style for him to go against, et cetera, et cetera. But anyway, it seems like he's kind of passing that on to Gervonta Davis and maybe even the other fighters in his stable. There's no reason Davis and Vasyl Lomachenko should not have fought yet. That would have been a tremendous, tremendous fight. But again, Lomachenko, some of his luster's off since the loss to Teofimo Lopez. We'll see if a rematch in that one happens. That should be that would be a barn burner. I also think if they fought again, Lomachenko would not let the fight get away from him early the way he did against Teofimo Lopez in the first one. But I digress. The point is, there's no reason that we shouldn't be seeing these great fights between great fighters happen, right? Why can't the fans get the fights that they want to see? greed, and ego, and it's hurting boxing. It's hurting boxing. So I mentioned Floyd Mayweather Jr. a couple of times earlier in this little monologue here, right? So let's talk about Floyd and something that I've thought about ad nauseum and discussed with some of my guys. All right. So we know that Floyd's skills in and out of the ring, whether or not it's in terms of his ability as a tremendous boxer, an all-time great, arguably the greatest defensive fighter of all time. Maybe you could argue Bernard Hopkins or Pernell Whitaker were right there with him as defensive fighters, but that's a different discussion. But we know that he is all-time great in the ring. We also know that he's all-time great out of it in terms of his ability to generate money and market fights, right? Even if it was a fight that he knew he would very easily win, because again, he has manipulated circumstances, picked the right opponent, picked the right time, and all that. He was able to really market the fight for, whether the people ordering the fight were fans of his, whether people ordering the fight wanted to see him possibly get beaten or beaten up. He did a fantastic job marketing the fight. So that's cool. So now here's something I've talked about, like I said, with my guys many times. Where does Floyd stand up all time against the elite welterweights of history, right? So I'm going to pick four of them. The last guy was went from welter up to middleweight. So but we'll get there, right? These are the guys that we call the four kings of the 1980s. Obviously, Sugar Ray Leonard, who in my estimation is probably the best welterweight of all time. For me, he is the most perfect blend of speed, and that speed of hand, speed of foot, reflexes, as well as power, knockout power. He was able to carry power from lightweight all the way up to middleweight. And to me, that's something that's tremendous, because if you look at a guy like Floyd, when you talk about him, people will point to the fact that, at lightweight and junior welter, he was actually knocking guys out. And he's got a fair amount of wins, some impressive stoppages on his resume up to that point. But it was odd because he couldn't carry the power with him when he got up to 147 and 154. And that's when you really see the ultra uber defensive Floyd, who was the king of shoulder roll, slipping the head, and then pot shotting back, 1-2 punches, not really trying to engage, not really doing anything dangerous, but arguably the best counter puncher in history. That's when you saw that. But you look at a guy like Sugar Ray Leonard, he had the speed, he had the power. So, that's awesome. Next, Tommy Hitman Hearns. Thomas Hitman Hearns was another one. He had speed, not to the level of Sugar Ray, and he didn't really have the foot speed like Sugar Ray. His hands were close, but he did have speed, but he had tremendous power. And again, that's power from welterweight all the way up to light heavy, and that was a power that he was able to carry with him and continue knocking guys out all the way up. I think he boxed professionally from I want to say 81 or 82 all the way up to 2006. He had his final fight. So, um, Tommy Hitman Hearns, just a tremendous, tremendous fighter. And the first fighter, coincidentally, ever to win world championships in 5 weight classes. All right. That's something Floyd always talks about. He won championships in 5 weight classes. But if you're on a trivia game show, a sports trivia game show, now you know Tommy Hitman Hearns was the first fighter to do that. Okay. Third of the four kings, Roberto Duran, man with the hands of stone. To me, this guy, he was just incredibly tough. If you recollect, I don't know how old you may be or how much you're into boxing. He was the first man to beat Sugar Ray Leonard as a professional. And it was just his ruthlessness and his continuing drive, always coming forward, always coming forward, always coming forward. That's the third of the four kings. And the fourth king, marvelous Marvin Hagler. Rest in peace, Marvin Hagler. Spent most of his time at middleweight and was just a tremendous, tremendous champion. I think he was undefeated for like 12 years before Sugar Ray Leonard managed to beat him in a narrowly contested fight, which so soured him on the sport of boxing, he retired and never came back to the ring. But marvelous Marvin Hagler, was another tremendous, tremendous fighter. And his fight with Tommy Hitman Hearns for the middleweight championship um, boasts a first round that most people who are into boxing argue as boxing's greatest round in history. And it was just it was 3 rounds of carnage in terms of two guys really going at each other, and he was able to, in the third round, put Tommy Hitman Hearns away, which was not at all an easy task. Okay, especially when around that time when Tommy Hearns was pretty much at the peak of his powers, and he was able to knock the Hitman out in the third round. So those are the four kings. I'll run through them again for you: Sugar Ray Leonard, Tommy Hitman Hearns, Roberto Duran, the man with the hands of stone, and marvelous Marvin Hagler. So where does Floyd Mayweather Jr. come into this? The whole discussion was where kind of he ranks among the all-time great welterweights. And let's be real here, okay? Floyd is all-time great. Only a fool would argue that he's not. But is he the so-called TBE? He likes to say he's TBE, as in the best ever, where some people use the acronym GOAT for greatest of all time. He likes to say TBE, the best ever. Okay, he isn't the best ever. He isn't even the best welterweight ever, and to me, it's not even close, right? So the reason I brought up the four kings was because those are the four best fighters, arguably ever in that weight class. Now, again, marvelous Marvin Hagler spent very little time there. Maybe among that weight class, you also say at some point Manny Pacquiao is probably up there. I don't know if he's up there with those guys, although that those would all make compelling matchups with a prime Pacquiao. Sugar Ray Robinson probably should be up there. But when we mention the four kings, I say that because those guys were all in the same weight class around the same time. Again, besides marvelous Marvin Hagler. But back to Floyd. So let's go ahead and actually break down the matches, the one-on-one matches between those two. And I'm not going to take it too far, but this is the one that I always like to watch and I always like to point to, okay? Sugar Ray Leonard, elite. When I say elite, elite hand and foot speed, arguably the fastest boxer in history in terms of hand and foot speed. Now, in pure hand speed, Amir Khan may rival him. That dude, his hands are like lightning. Too bad his chin is like glass. But Amir Khan may rival Sugar Ray in terms of elite hand speed, but it's a fair statement to say that Sugar Ray is probably the fastest boxer of all time. His hand and feet were tremendous, and that speed would probably allow him to trap and hit Floyd Mayweather Jr., who again is such a tremendous boxer, and guys get really frustrated with their inability to hit him with the shoulder roll, the head movement, his defensive ability, his reflexes. Now, the thing about Sugar Ray is Sugar Ray Leonard was so fast that he probably would have been able to get into Floyd's defense and crack it, which is something obviously no other fighter in the 50 fights he fought was able to do. But I do believe that Sugar Ray Leonard probably would have been able to do that. And a quick side note, had Floyd fought a prime Manny instead of stringing him along for 5 years, as well as fighting an older Sugar Shane Mosley, if he'd have fought a prime Sugar Shane Mosley, I do believe both of those guys probably had the speed and the ability to have cracked his defensive code. But you know, that's easy enough to say. Again, 50 fighters weren't able to do it. So um, I definitely believe that Sugar Ray Leonard beats Floyd probably rather handily. The difference with Sugar Ray is also to go it along with all that speed, he had genuine knockout power. I believe he knocked out Floyd Mayweather Sr. So, not to say that Floyd Mayweather Jr. is not a far superior fighter than his father was, but you get the point. I definitely think that Sugar Ray beats Floyd and beats him easily. I don't know that he knocks him out, but I think he beats him by a wide margin on the card. I think he would just be able to pick him off with relative ease. And Floyd being such a counterpunch artist, and again, in my estimation, a guy who lacks the heart and the warrior spirit to really trade and walk through the fire, I don't think he would do what it takes to win a fight against a Sugar Ray Leonard. Moving right along, Tommy Hitman Hearns. We talked about it. Ridiculous knockout power from welterweight all the way up to light heavy, and first guy to win championships in 5 weight classes. I just don't think that Floyd had the power at 147 or 154 to keep Tommy Hitman Hearns off of him. And Hearns had enough speed and enough power that I believe he definitely would have cracked Floyd's, seemingly impenetrable guard, and he probably would have knocked him out. I believe that. Um, Roberto Duran. This one is interesting. They always talk about styles making fights. I see Roberto Duran. My analogy to him, my comparison is he's the Smoking Joe Frazier of the lower weight classes. Why do I say that? Smoking Joe's thing was he was going to keep coming until he broke you down. Punish the body, punish the body, punish the body. Especially if you're a fighter that moves a lot, stays on your feet, on your quote unquote bicycle, like Floyd does. Roberto Duran was going to break you down by breaking down your body. And I truly believe that, him being a brutal and vicious body puncher, along with the ability to really go to the head when your arms start coming down, I think he would have been able to stop Floyd. And again, at 157, 147, and 154, Floyd's brittle hands and lack of true power would not have been able to keep Roberto Duran honest and keep him off him. That's my feeling. Finally, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, the fourth of the four kings. Floyd wouldn't take that fight. I mean, that's all there is to it. But let's say, for argument that he did, what he would do is what he always does, and he would try to stipulate maybe a catch weight of 154 and weight drain Marvelous Marvin down to that weight to make him take that fight. But Hagler was just too tough, man. That's all there is to it. That's another one. He had power, he had heart, he was just going to keep coming. And I don't believe, again, whether it's 157 or 154, Floyd just doesn't have the power to keep guys like that off of him, right? So at the end of the day, Floyd has tremendous skills. Floyd is, again, arguably the best defensive fighter ever. If you want to say Sweet Pete Whitaker, if you want to say Bernard Hopkins, that's cool, right? You can say those. But Floyd is arguably best defensive fighter ever. CompuBox says that he is in terms of opponents punch connect, and that's fine. But I just don't see him having the heart, the warrior spirit. He doesn't have that thing inside that fighters have, right? I call Floyd a tremendous boxer, one of the best boxers of all time, but I don't view him as a fighter. Again, you look at a Sugar Ray Leonard, you look at Tommy Hitman Hearns, you look at Roberto Duran, Marvelous Marvin Hagler. Those dudes could all box, but they were all fighters deep down, right? They were coming to fight you. So they could box you, but they could also fight you. And I think Floyd, that's where, to me, is his fatal weakness against guys of this caliber and of this era, is that all those guys could fight you and box you, and Floyd can only box you. I don't believe he can fight you. So at the end of the day, I just don't see him having the heart to walk through the fire and beat guys of this caliber. Here we go. We're going to talk some college football now. And for the first time in a long time, we're going to talk about college football in the context of games. Games are actually here. It's week one. I know we had some games last week. If you're a college football fan, that was week zero. I watched a couple of them myself, but it's now week one. So officially, the season is starting, right? So we're going to talk college football a little bit in the context of games, and that's so cool, so refreshing to be able to do. And I hope to have some more good college football guests during this season. You guys know Zach Goodall, writer for All Gators with SI. You know my guy John Kennedy, host of the Always Irish Notre Dame football podcast. You know Pete Sampson, Notre Dame beat writer for the Athletics. So I got some really good football minds that I can't wait to get on here during the season and talk to you guys some more in terms of what's happening and how everything's being affected. But tonight, week one of the college football season starts. I'm super excited. And we've got, in my estimation, a pretty good one to open things up. And that is Ohio State and Minnesota in the Big 12. All right. Most people probably assume, and probably rightly so, that Ohio State's going to win this one. I think it may be more competitive than people think for a couple of reasons, but let's talk about it a little bit. Both teams obviously lost key players to the NFL. Ohio State lost Trey Sermon at running back. He set a Big Ten championship game record last season. Of course, they lost all-world quarterback Justin Fields, among others. We know Ohio State sends lots of guys to the league every year, whether they are undrafted rookie free agents or whether they're drafted. And we also know, college sports guys graduate, okay? But the Buckeyes bring back arguably the best wide receiver tandem in the country in Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. I was pretty surprised Chris Olave did not go to the league, but he may have seen, really elite wide receiver talent coming out last year and said, okay, I'll stay one more year and kind of boost my position in terms of going a little higher in the draft. Not a bad move, hopefully he stays healthy. But Ohio State is also breaking in a brand new quarterback in CJ Stroud. And when you break in a new quarterback, whether it's pro, whether it's college, even high school, that's always a question, no matter how talented they are. And CJ Stroud is extremely talented. He's mobile, he's got a big arm. He was a 5-star recruit, not last year, but the year before. So, we kind of know what we're going to expect in terms of a quarterback who was recruited to Ohio State, right? The guy's going to be legit. So he's the guy now, and we'll see what he's got. The good thing is, again, he's going to have weapons around him. On the other side, the Minnesota Golden Gophers, disappointing season last year. They were 3-4 and really got hurt badly by COVID. They actually had one game, can't remember who they played, where they had like 35 players out because of the virus, but they still went ahead and played it. Crazy, right? There's a lot of hope coming into this season for Coach PJ Fleck, Mr. Row the Boat himself, and the rest of his squad after they went 11-2 in 2019. And that was one of the best seasons for them in a long time. And, people were really expecting good things out of them going forward. PJ Fleck got extended with a big deal. And, the recruiting is up. There's some talent there. But again, last year was kind of I don't want to say a throwout season because that would disrespect the things that all the different teams did, but it was a season definitely unlike any other and had a lot of disastrous effects for a lot of programs. Um, so again, there's a lot of hope coming into this season. You have redshirt senior Tanner Morgan, who's one of the better quarterbacks in the country, running the system, and running back Muhammad Ibrahim, who's back, and he is one of the best running backs in the country. I think he was second in the country in yards per game last year. He's a real horse. And so in this particular game, I think what we can kind of assume we're going to see is that Minnesota with Ibrahim and that offensive line really try to chew up the clock and control time of possession on the ground and keep the ball away from the explosive Buckeye passing game. That's what I would do. That would be the smart thing to do. You have an outstanding running back. You have a strong O-line. You have on the other side an elite wide receiver tandem who can get downfield and make a lot of big plays. So what do? You run the ball, try to keep it away from them. You just try to play solid football, right? And especially with their own best wide receiver, there being the Golden Gophers, Rashad Bateman, he's going to the NFL. Their big play opportunities in the pass game might be limited. Now, maybe they'll have something, but also Ohio State is known for having really good defensive backs. Their secondary is always outstanding. So you get, your best receiver gone. So you might not want to choose this game as the one to try to break in your next up guy. But that's me. This is just one that I'm looking forward to seeing. I'm definitely going to hit the couch and watch this game tonight. And I'm not expecting any upset here, but I do want to see if the Golden Gophers can kind of give a good accounting of themselves against a team that's definitely more talented and put themselves in a position where, okay, even they don't pull the upset. I mean, there's no moral victories in sports, right? I get it. But if and really acquit themselves well, play this game close, maybe have a chance to win into the fourth quarter, it kind of sets the springboard for going through for the rest of the season. You say, listen, we were able to play with one of the best, most talented teams in the country. Let's go ahead and win the rest of the games we should win and see where the chips fall from there. Okay. So again, not expecting an upset, not expecting Minnesota to beat Ohio State, but I do expect them to play them tougher than most people do, and it would be good for them going through the season if they can, make a good accounting of themselves. So this weekend it has some really exciting matchups overall. So like I mentioned, Minnesota, Ohio State, for me, I think that's going to be an interesting one tonight because at the end of the day, I do expect Ohio State to win, but it's also kind of going to be a first look at how good are they? Where's their defensive line, which has been, monstrous over the last maybe since Urban Meyer got there pretty much. They've had great defensive line play. They've always been able to run the football. Now they have great quarterback play, elite wide receivers. So what you're looking at is how good do they look? Because at the end of the day, they're Big Ten, but what it's always going to be the comparison is how good do they look in terms of comparing them against a Clemson, against a Georgia, against an Alabama, against an Oklahoma. So it's an early opportunity for Ohio State to make a statement, say, hey, we lost a lot of talent to the league. We lost a lot of talent, but we are still an elite program and we have elite talent. So it should be good. So I'm just gonna mention some of the other games and give a little brief rundown that I'm looking forward to this weekend. Clemson and Georgia on Saturday night. We know Georgia's always stout defensively. We know that. We know they're gonna run the ball and we know they're gonna throw it too, right? By the way, if you've listened to this podcast a lot over the last few years I've been doing this, you know what is my theory on successful football. It's throwback, it's not sexy, but it works. And what is it? Let me remind you, since we're starting the season here. Stop the run, run the ball. Stop the run the ball. Very simple. This is a time-tested football tenet. It works. You do that, you will win more games than not. Anyway, we know Georgia's going to do that. So I guess one of the big questions for them is, can QB quarterback JT Daniels live up to his billing? Obviously, we saw him do some really good things last year in the COVID year. But again, you kind of got to take the COVID year with a grain of salt. But the guy's really talented. We know what he is. This should be interesting to see what he's going to do this season. On the Clemson side, we know they've been an elite program for the last 7-8 years now. And now we need to find out if sophomore quarterback DJ Uiagalelei is going to be as good as advertised. And what I think is the most interesting thing with him now, if you know me, you know I'm a diehard Notre Dame football fan. We saw DJU go to South Bend last year and set the all-time record in only his second start of any quarterback who's ever played against Notre Dame. He has set the all-time passing yardage record. Okay. So we know he can sling it. We know he's got a rocket, but we also know he isn't nearly as mobile as Trevor Lawrence. So what does that do? Changes the dimensions of the offense. I don't think you're going to see too many designed runs with him. I don't think you're going to see too many, ride and decide type plays with him. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of changes they've made in the offense in terms of how they're going to run things. Travis Etienne is gone, but we know that whatever Clemson lost, they replaced in recruiting. This should be another great matchup. The best Big Ten openers in recent memory, Penn State plays Wisconsin. Don't have a lot of detail on this one, but I just feel like this one should go a long way towards deciding the Big Ten season. Penn State generally starts off pretty strong, but then being in the Big Ten East, they eventually have to play Ohio State, and that's normally where their season kind of goes downhill, I should say. So this should be a good one. Either way, to be whoever wins this game really gets a good jump out on the rest of the season. Wisconsin, I kind of got to look at and see. Normally, they have that elite tailback. We know their mantra, their style of play, kind of their identity over the last 20, 25 years has really been punch you in the mouth, physical, offensive football, really run the football extremely well. Now, I think you know that in 2021, you can't win a national championship solely on that, just playing great defense and punching you in the mouth. There's a level of success you can have, but you also need to be able to go downfield, and expand in the passing game. We're going to see if they can do that. Again, it's only game one, but this should be a really good matchup just in terms of a really great Big Ten game to start early, which is something we don't usually see. Out west, we see the LSU Tigers from the SEC take on UCLA Bruins from the Pac-12. Should be another good one. We see LSU was 2 years removed from a championship and one of the best seasons in college football history. We know they are always loaded with talent, but last year was a real big letdown. Obviously, they lost a lot to the NFL. But we see they're going to try to bounce back this year. UCLA is a sneaky pick for a lot of people in the Pac-12, and a lot of people have this game closer than they normally might. Obviously, this is what Chip Kelly's third year in the program. They've gotten some quality guys via the transfer portal, and we will see what they're able to do. I don't know if they'll be able to stand up with the speed in the trenches of not the speed, excuse me, the strength in the trenches of LSU. They may be able to deal with the speed on the outside. Pac-12 always has fast guys, so I don't know that speed is going to be an issue, and then especially on a Chip Kelly coach team, speed is going to be important. How they run their offense in terms of tempo could be something interesting in terms of that's not generally something you see. You're seeing a bit more in the SEC, but not generally something you see in the SEC. But it should be interesting. LSU, UCLA, looking forward to it. And of course, in prime time, Sunday night, Notre Dame will be in Tallahassee to take on the Florida State Seminoles. If you know me, you know I'm a diehard Notre Dame football fan. This is nothing new. Really looking forward to this game. Obviously, the first game of the Irish season. And this one's going to have kind of interesting subplot in terms of the recent death of legendary Florida State head coach Bobby Bowden. Now, you know that the Noles will be playing for him. It'll kind of be, the opener tribute game to them. This is a game, one of the games of the century back in 1992, 93, which is actually the game that kind of really hooked me on being a Notre Dame fan was number one, Florida State getting knocked off at Notre Dame when they had Charlie Ward, Warwick Dunn, Peter Warwick, all those guys. They went into Notre Dame and they lost. It's kind of where I really fell in love with Notre Dame football. But anyway, that was something of a rivalry, throughout that time. And then kind of Florida State really took off, became a better program, was winning championships, was, I think 15 straight years in the top 15 or the top 10. Bobby Bowden really had that program humming while Notre Dame was, in a downtime trying to figure out how they were going to get back up. But this game, you never know, could kind of be the rekindling of that kind of rivalry. Florida State always has talent. They're in the second year of Mike Norvell's system. They've had a full camp, unlike last year, and they're at home. A lot of those things kind of fall in their favor. They haven't named the starting quarterback for this one yet, which is kind of interesting to me. What I'm curious about is seeing if UCF transfer Mckenzie Milton kind of gets the nod. Now, this is a guy who almost lost his leg, after a gruesome injury a couple of years ago playing for UCF. And he has fought his way back onto the field after numerous injuries, a tremendous amount of rehab. But now he's going to have to prove he can still go if he gets the nod and gets out there. All right. On the Notre Dame side, a whole lot of talent left for the NFL. The Irish had 9 players drafted, tying for second with Georgia. They've got a lot of transition on what was one of the best offensive line groups in the country. A new quarterback in Wisconsin transfer, Jack Cohn, who doesn't bring the mobility and the playmaking ability outside of the pocket that Ian Book did, but he definitely has a bigger arm and maybe a better ability to make throws that lead the receiver and really push the ball downfield. When I talk about leading the receiver, talk about those anticipatory throws, throwing to the spot where the receiver will be, not necessarily waiting for them to get there, then trying to deliver it. That was something that, as much as Ian Book is a winner and did the absolute best he could at Notre Dame and is now in the NFL, I didn't feel like Ian Book was capable of making those throws, and it hurt the Irish sometimes in some of their biggest games. But Jack Cohn is a guy who can do that. Now, you trade off one strength for another. I mentioned he doesn't have Book's mobility or ability to make the plays outside of structure. So that means, you have to do a better job on the offensive line, holding up and allowing him to make those throws. But with that said, he doesn't necessarily need as long to see guys get open to deliver the football. So, we'll see kind of how that plays out. Let's see, where were we? There's also the expectation that the Notre Dame offense will be more willing to take big shots and be more aggressive in the passing game. They have more speed on the outside. You got Braden Lindsey back. Hopefully, you have Kevin Austin, who has been really racked with injuries last year. Hopefully, he will be able to stay healthy because he is supposed to be the type of difference maker on the outside that Notre Dame has needed for years. So we'll see what happens there. They still have All-American running back Kyron Williams and his backup, Chris Tyree, who is a speedster, scat back type guy who can do a lot of things in the passing game and also can run between the tackles. You have Bolitnikov Award and Mackey Award watch list tight end Mike Meyer, who is just a beast. Baby Gronk is what they call him. Defensive coordinator Clark Lee is going to Vanderbilt, his alma mater, where he's now the head coach. And former defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman, former Cincinnati defensive coordinator Marcus Freeman, he's now going to be calling the defense for the Irish. And from everything that we're hearing from the players and everything, it's being said that Marcus Freeman's defense is probably a little less cerebral than Clark Lee's, but it really lets guys just go out and make plays. So it's like less complicated. So we'll see what happens in terms of what type of adjustments he can make, being that the defense has been Notre Dame's strength for a few seasons now. So it should be good. This is a game that the Irish should win, but you can't count the Knowles out at home at night with all the motivation that we'll have. All the things that I talked about, being kind of the Bobby Bowden tribute game, being at home, second year in the system. They had a full camp. They have the advantage of having not named a starting QB. So now Notre Dame has to prepare for both of their quarterbacks. Should be very interesting. The last game that I really want to see is UCF and Boise State in the bounce house. All right. These are two of the best programs in the group of five. And actually, I just got a notification from The Athletic saying that the Big 12 is in talks to expand. And among teams they're really looking at is BYU, UCF, Cincinnati, and Houston. And that was cool because I've been saying that UCF needed to find its way into a Power Five conference. Now, that doesn't necessarily make the Big 12 any more viable than it previously was. Even all four of those teams probably can't replace the name and brand power and recognition of Texas and Oklahoma in terms of college football. But, as a whole, those four programs can kind of they can regenerate, some of what was lost, not all of it, but some of it. And this also gives teams like Cincinnati and teams like UCF, when they're at their best, that opportunity to make the playoff. Because, if you've listened to me, you know that I've been ranting and raving about the fact that I feel like the system is designed and rigged so that no matter how good certain teams are, they're not going to get that shot. So this should be interesting. Anyway, I'm definitely looking forward to UCF and Boise State. We know Boise State's going to be ready to play. We know that they are good every year, just about, and they're always prepared. But what I really want to see is how different offensively UCF looks under Gus Malzahn. Now, a lot of Knights fans are on the quote unquote Gus bus. And we know that team likes we know that Gus likes his teams to play fast and run a hurry up style, which it's not a huge departure from what we saw from former coach Josh Heupel, who's now at Tennessee. But we likely won't see nearly as many open sets and deep downfield shots in the passing game under Malzahn. Now, there's probably going to be more power running concepts as well as option looks. But the option looks, I don't know if that's what's best for UCF quarterback Dylan Gabriel, who is a lights out pocket passer. Now, I guess we're going to get an opportunity here actually to see how good Dylan Gabriel is, because he's going to be running a different system. And so we're going to find out if a lot of his production in the last 2 years has been thanks to what Josh Heupel was doing versus his own ability. So this should be interesting. I don't know exactly what to expect from UCF, but I do know what to expect from Boise State. They always run the football well. They play sound defense. They don't turn it over a lot. The difference might just be the bounce house. And trust me, I've covered UCF. When that place gets rocking, it is a raucous environment. And the way it's built, the name bounce house is apropos, because that thing starts shaking and you're like, whoa, what is going on here? So it's really cool. It gets really loud. It's awesome. And for I think seating less than 50,000 people, it is a tremendous college football environment. It's crazy. So at the end of the day, College football is back. There are tons of games to watch. Most of the stadiums will be packed, and it'll be good to see. Am I excited about it? Let's ask Bart Scott.
Can't wait.